The first thing Zola noticed was the smell. Not the kind of smell that makes you wrinkle your nose and step back. More like the smell of something old and forgotten. Damp wood, rust, and the particular sadness of a space that hadn't been lived in for a long time. She stood in the doorway and didn't say anything, because she didn't know what to say. Elijah was watching her. He stood a few feet behind her, his hands in his pockets, his face very still. He had driven the whole 2 hours from Atlanta without explaining where they were going. Just said he wanted to show her something, said it mattered to him. Zola had assumed it was a property he was considering, maybe something he wanted her opinion on. Elijah ran a mid-sized logistics company with contracts across 3 states. He knew things about square footage and location value. She had pictured something different from this. The house was a single-story structure near the edge of a rural county she had never visited. The porch sagged on one side. The screen door was hanging by one hinge. Inside, there was a bare mattress on a metal frame, a plastic folding table with 2 chairs that didn't match, and a kitchen with a hot plate and a half-empty bag of rice on the counter. A single bulb hung from the ceiling in the main room. It worked. She had already tested it. She turned around to look at him. "This is yours?" she asked. "It was," he said, growing up. Zola looked back at the room. She recalibrated. That was different from what she had imagined, and it shifted the weight of the moment into something heavier. "How long did you live here?" she asked. "Until I was 19, he said. "My mother and I. Then she passed, and I left." Zola had known Elijah for 8 months. She knew he had grown up poor. He had mentioned it once, briefly, in the way that people mention things they have made peace with, but don't particularly enjoy revisiting. She had not pressed him. She had assumed the way people sometimes assume that the details weren't hers to demand. Now she was standing inside those details. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. "I wanted you to see it," he said, "before anything else." She didn't understand that yet, but she didn't push. Instead, she walked to the window. The glass was cloudy with years of grime, but through it she could see a yard that had gone completely wild. Tall grass, a rusted barrel, and what might have once been a garden bed along the fence line. She could see where someone had tried, a long time ago, to make something grow. "She had tomatoes out there," Elijah said from behind her. He had moved closer without her hearing him. Every summer, she'd get up early to water them before it got too hot. Zola didn't say anything, she just listened. "She worked 2 jobs, he said. Cleaned offices downtown 3 nights a week, and did alterations out of the back room on weekends. She made $40, sometimes $50 on a good alteration week. She kept a jar in the kitchen cabinet for what she called the serious money. That was the money we didn't touch unless the situation was serious." He paused. "We touched it a lot." Zola turned away from the window. Elijah was looking at the floor. Not the way people look at floors when they're avoiding you. More the way people look when they're seeing something that isn't there anymore. "She always told me that being poor wasn't the same as being without dignity," he said. "She kept this place clean. I mean clean. You could eat off that floor." He glanced up. "I know how it looks now. It looks like a place that misses someone taking care of it," Zola said. He looked at her. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out the way true things sometimes come out, without ceremony. "I haven't been back in 4 years, he said. "Why now?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because I needed to know something." She waited. He didn't finish the sentence. Not then. They stayed longer than she expected. Elijah found a broom in the closet. Still there, still functional. The kind of thing that outlasts everything else. And without saying much, Zola took it from his hands and started sweeping. He stood in the doorway for a moment watching her. Then he went outside and started pulling weeds along the front porch steps. She didn't know why she started cleaning. It wasn't a calculated decision. The floor was dirty, and the broom was in her hand, and it felt like the right thing to do with her hands while her mind was still catching up with where she was, and what it meant that he had brought her here. She swept the main room, then the kitchen. She found a rag under the sink, and used it to wipe down the folding table. The hot plate was beyond saving, but she unplugged it from the wall anyway. Outside, she could hear him working, the rhythmic tearing of weeds from dry soil, the occasional sound of him tossing something aside. When she came to the back room, a narrow space barely big enough for the metal bed frame, she stopped. On the wall above the headboard, someone had taped up a piece of paper that had gone yellow and soft with age. It was a child's drawing. A house with a triangle roof and smoke coming from the chimney, even though the house in the drawing had no fireplace. Two figures standing in front of it, one tall, one small. Underneath, in the uncertain handwriting of a young child, were the words, "Me and Mama." Home. Zola stood there for a long time. She thought about her own mother, Mama Reeves, who still lived in the house she had grown up in Charlotte, North Carolina, who made sweet potato pie every Thanksgiving and cried at commercials for insurance companies and called Zola every Sunday at 7 p.m. without fail, who had told her, when she first mentioned Elijah, to pay attention not to what a man had, but to what he carried. Zola hadn't fully understood that at the time. She was beginning to understand it now. She did not take the drawing down. She left it exactly where it was. They ate lunch on the porch steps. Sandwiches Elijah had packed, which she'd had no idea about until he went to the trunk of the car and came back with a cooler, turkey and Swiss on sourdough. Chips. 2 bottles of water and 1 bottle of sweet tea he'd divided into plastic cups. It was not a romantic lunch. The steps were uncomfortable, and the sun was at an angle that made her squint. A dog somewhere down the road barked intermittently. It was one of the better lunches she'd had in a long time. "My co-worker thinks I should break up with you," she said. He looked at her sideways. "Priya," she said. "She's been saying it for about 2 months now. She thinks you're too secretive." Zola picked a chip off her napkin. "She doesn't know where you live, what kind of car you drive, what your place looks like. She thinks that's suspicious." "What do you think?" he asked. "I think Priya has been watching too many true crime documentaries," Zola said. He laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised out of him. She had always loved that about him, the way he laughed, like he hadn't seen it coming. "I also think," she continued more quietly, "that you've been careful about what you show people, and I understand that. I just didn't know how deep it went." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did it scare you? When you saw it?" She considered the question honestly. "No," she said. "It made me sad for the boy who grew up here. That's different." He looked out at the yard. The weeds he'd cleared, the bare earth now visible along the fence line where his mother's garden had been. "When I was 12, he said, a kid at school found out where I lived. He told everyone, made a whole thing of it." He paused. "After that, I got very good at not letting people find out things before I was ready." "And now?" Zola asked. He turned to look at her directly. "And now I'm trying to unlearn some of that," he said, "with the right person." She didn't look away. "You could have just told me, Elijah," she said. Her voice was gentle but clear. "I would have listened." "I know," he said. "I think I needed to see it instead of just saying it. Bring you here instead of just describing it." He looked at the house behind them. "Some things you have to show." She thought about that. She thought about the drawing on the wall. She thought about the jar of serious money in the cabinet, and the tomatoes by the fence, and 2 jobs and $40 and a child who grew up to run a company across 3 states. "Okay," she said. "I hear you." She didn't tell Priya about the house. Not that week, anyway. What she told Priya was that she and Elijah had taken a drive, that it was good, that she felt like she understood him better now. Priya, who had been preparing to deliver a full argument about red flags and emotional unavailability, looked disappointed to have nothing to argue with. "You're not even a little concerned?" Priya asked. "About what? That he's so private?" "I think there's a difference between private and secretive," Zola said. "Private means you choose carefully who you let in. Secretive means you're hiding something bad." She shrugged. "He let me in." Priya studied her for a moment. "You really like him?" "I do really like him." Priya, okay, but she was smiling a little despite herself. What Zola didn't say, because she was still sitting with it, still turning it over, was that standing in that small house with the sagging porch and the yellow drawing on the wall, she had felt something settle in her. A kind of certainty. The kind you can't talk yourself into. It either shows up or it doesn't. It had shown up. 3 weeks later, Elijah called her on a Tuesday night and asked if she wanted to come to dinner. Not a restaurant, his place. She had never been to his place. She said yes before he finished the sentence. His apartment was on the 14th floor of a building in Midtown. Clean lines, good light, the kind of furniture that has been chosen deliberately rather than accumulated. Bookshelves along one wall. A kitchen that looked used, not staged. A framed photograph on the shelf near the window. A woman in her 40s, smiling broadly, standing in front of a fence with tomato plants growing behind her. Zola stopped when she saw it. "Your mother," she said. It wasn't a question. Yeah, he came to stand beside her. That was the summer before she got sick. Her best tomato year, she always said. Like it was something to be proud of. It was, Zola said. He looked at her. "Growing something," she said. "Keeping something alive, that's always something to be proud of." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I should have introduced you two. I think I already feel like I know her a little," Zola said. He didn't say anything, but his hand found hers, and he held it. Dinner was grilled salmon and roasted vegetables and rice, and he had made it himself, which she had not expected. They sat at his table for almost 3 hours. They talked about his company, and her work as a pediatric occupational therapist, and her family in Charlotte, and the summer she had spent in Ghana, the year after college, and why he had started going to church again at 31, and what they each regretted, and what they didn't. It was the kind of conversation that changes the shape of a relationship. The kind you remember afterward in pieces. Not because you weren't paying attention, but because there was too much to hold all at once. Around 10 o'clock, as she was putting on her coat, he said, "I want to tell you something." She turned around. "The company," he said, "it's bigger than I've let on." She waited. "A lot bigger," he said. "We closed a federal contract last year. I should have mentioned it earlier. I didn't, because—" He stopped, started again. "I've been burned before, by people who acted differently once they knew the full picture. And I didn't want that with you, so I kept some things back." She looked at him. "You tested me," she said. He didn't deny it, not deliberately at first. But then he exhaled. "Yeah, I was watching. How you reacted to things. How you treated people. What mattered to you." He looked at her steadily. "I'm sorry if that feels like a manipulation. It wasn't meant to be." She thought about it, honestly thought about it, standing in his hallway with her coat half on. She thought about Priya telling her he was too secretive. She thought about the drive out to that county she'd never heard of, and the broom in her hands, and the drawing on the wall, and lunch on broken steps in the afternoon sun. "I'm not happy about it," she said finally. "I want you to know that. If we're doing this, really doing this, I need you to trust me enough to not run tests. I'm not auditioning, I know," he said. He looked like he meant it. "I know that. Okay," she said. "Okay, I'm not walking out," she said. "But I need you to know where I stand." "I do," he said. "Believe me, I do." She finished putting on her coat. He walked her to the elevator. They stood there for a moment in the quiet of the hallway. "The house," she said. "What are you going to do with it?" He leaned against the wall. "I've been thinking about that," he said. "There's a woman down the road who used to bring my mother groceries when things were tight. She's in her 70s now. Still in the same house." Paused. "I think maybe I fix it up, properly, and let her use the land for a garden." Zola looked at him. "Tomatoes," he said. She smiled. "That sounds right." She told her mother about Elijah that Sunday. The full version, the drive, the house, the drawing on the wall, dinner on the 14th floor, the conversation in the hallway. Mama Reeves listened without interrupting, which was not always her way. When Zola finished, there was a pause. "Baby," her mother said, "that man took you to the most honest place he knows." Zola hadn't thought of it that way. "That's not a test," Mama Reeves said. "That's an offering." 6 months later, Elijah flew her mother up from Charlotte for what he described as a dinner. Her mother arrived in her good church dress, which should have been a clue, but Zola had been looking at other things. He had rented out a private room at a restaurant downtown. There were maybe 30 people. His closest colleagues, a few old friends, her best friend from college, Priya, who was already crying before anything had happened. Zola's mother was sitting at the center table, smiling in a way that said she had known about this for at least 2 weeks. Elijah stood up at some point during the evening, after the appetizers, before the entrees. In the unhurried way he did most things, and began to speak. He talked about driving 2 hours on a Saturday morning to a county he had avoided for years. About a woman who picked up a broom without being asked, and cleaned a floor that hadn't been cleaned in a long time, and left a child's drawing on the wall exactly where she found it. He talked about his mother, and tomato plants, and a jar of serious money. He talked about what it meant to show someone the truest version of where you came from, and have them respond, not with discomfort or distance, but with a rag under the sink and a sandwich on the porch steps and the simple grace of staying. By the time he got down on one knee, Zola was crying in a way she hadn't cried in years. Not from sadness, but from the full weight of being known. "I should have trusted you sooner," he said quietly, just to her. "I'm going to spend a long time making up for that." She laughed through the tears. "You already started," she said. He opened the box. She said yes. Priya was fully sobbing somewhere to the left. Mama Reeves was holding a handkerchief to her face and murmuring something to the woman next to her that sounded like I told her. I told her from the beginning. Later that night, after the restaurant and the congratulations and the long drive home, Zola sat in her apartment and thought about the first day, the smell of the house, the cloudy window, the wild yard, the way she had stood in that doorway and not known what to say, and chosen to stay anyway. She thought about what her mother had said. "That's not a test. That's an offering." She thought maybe they were both right. Maybe some things are tests and offerings at the same time. Ways of saying, here is where I come from. Here is what I have been afraid of. Here is the thing I most needed you to see. And the answer, when the answer is real, isn't a word. It's a broom. It's staying. It's lunch on broken steps and not touching the drawing on the wall. It's everything you do before anyone asks you to.